I accidentally got a custom color. Welcome back, Troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Today we're documenting one of my favorite budget-level true vintage Gibson guitars, a Melody Maker. However, there's something special about this particular one. I got a custom color without knowing it. But first, let's just talk about what makes these things so great. So a Melody Maker was initially introduced by Gibson just to offer a budget-level line of guitars for somebody who couldn't afford the Les Paul Standard or the Les Paul Custom. And yes, that's right, even cheaper than the Junior and Special models, which were also considered student grade. And they were first introduced for 1959. They initially looked like this. Very familiar, right? It's a Les Paul body shape. Single cutaway, the early ones had a wide pickup, the later ones got slightly thinner. But then by 1961, since the regular Les Paul model shape was discontinued, they came up with this new double cut-esque design. It's not exactly SG, it's not exactly DC Junior, it's just somewhere in between. Then 1965 happens, and we get what I affectionately refer to as the freaky fish shape thing. Because it's like a goldfish cracker, and the proportions are just a little bit bulbous. It's a little bit doofy, but I love these things mainly because of one feature. They have really big, thick, chunky necks. They start off relatively nice sized, great for chords, very full, but the farther up the neck you go, they get massive, and I love that neck profile. It's just so unique. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, the original pickups in these things, are they fantastic? No, and we'll learn that today. However, they are great modifying platforms. However, I'm not alone with my particular love of this version because this is the famous Joan Jett guitar. Now, she had painted hers white and put the velvet hammer pickup in it, but this is what it started life as. But this weird shape lasted about a year or two until they finally came out with the SG style Melody Makers, and those things are very expensive. And that pretty much retires the original Melody Makers before we go into like the SG 100 type series in the 70s. Now, generally speaking, this version is the cheapest of all of them, probably because they made more of them than the first iteration of the double cut. Now, when I say affordable, they're still relatively expensive. When I was first buying these, they were like $600 to $1,200. That was only a couple of years ago. Nowadays, people tend to ask between $1,500 to $2,500, and sometimes even twice as much. But trust me, that $15 to $25 is pretty much the sweet spot nowadays. But now let's talk about the color. Usually these things are a cherry finish, very similar to an SG. And that's part of the reason why I liked them, because they aged very similar to a 60s SG. They got the finish checking all over. The finish feels like glass. They're just a lot of fun for the money. And I was on Reverb one night. I saw one of these and I thought, hey, that's cool. I haven't had one of those in a while. It was a good price. I decided to pick it up for my shop. But then when it arrived, we had unboxed this together probably about 8 months ago. I noticed, there's paint on the side of the neck, more specifically on the side of the fretboard. So you have your dot inlays within the finish. That is a custom color known as Ember Red. From afar, this really doesn't look any different, right? But it is significantly different because this is not a see-through finish. You don't get to see your awesome wood grain and the whole neck thing that I just talked about. So custom color is really cool. I'm glad I get to document this one today. It's not full of the original, but we'll talk about that more on the workbench. Speaking of which, this is a natural transitioning point. Let's get it cleaned up and take a deep look. Inside our old Ember Red friend, let's check it out. Here's what the pickup looks like on the backside. It's just a single coil all encased. Our pots date to 1965, 31st week, 27th week on this one. So yes, that makes this a very solid 1965 example. Got a ceramic disc capacitor in this one, and a switchcraft output jack with a ground wire. And this is what the route for one of these things look like under here. Keep in mind, you can find 2 pickup variations on this. Personally, I really like the 1 pickup ones. Pretty common to take these, route it out, put a humbucker in. They get called a poor man's Junior because vintage Juniors are ridiculously expensive. We've got Melody Maker on our tenon cover, part of our pick guard. But if you remove that, you can see what they're covering, the tenon of the neck. Here's a look at our lightning bar wraparound tailpiece. Backside looks like this, and you can see some markings in there. And then not all of these, but a lot of them did ship with this vibrola. So we've got 3 spacers, and then the screws go into those. That's why the finish is all boogered up around here. And then from there, you're supposed to have another metal bar that slips on here, and then the strings go into that, and there's a bar attached to that other piece, and you can get a slight warble effect. Unfortunately, we're missing that piece, but they didn't stay in tune that well. So this is a very common modification. Remove that part, just set it up as a wrap tail because you can, because you've got the option, and then leave that in place to hide the holes and just because it looks kind of cool. Cool to see how the Ember Red finish has kind of faded over the years. It started really red. It's like a cardinal, but then over here, as the clear coat has aged, it just kind of becomes more of a ketchup color. They're just a slab mahogany body. Thankfully, we still have the original knobs. Now, unfortunately, this knob keeps spinning. So at first I thought the pot was loose, but no. The splines inside the knob have worn over the years. So it still turns just fine, but if you put any additional pressure, that's when it starts indefinitely turning. So you just gotta be careful on that one. But our tone position is just fine. And why I say it's a miracle these are still on here, it's very common for people to rip these off to restore more expensive guitars, such as an SG of the era. So we'll just take a second to appreciate all the wear and tear. You can really see the finish checking now after it was cleaned a little bit. It's got gashes and gouges. I'm not exactly too sure how that happens, but it was a Melody Maker. It was never meant to be an expensive vintage piece. I mean, you can basically choose between one of these or a brand new Les Paul Standard. There's pros and cons to each. Although if it's your first and only guitar, I'd probably suggest the modern day Standard. But if you're looking to get into that vintage market, these are a great way to start. I'm pretty sure these are Brazilian rosewood fretboards yet. I think it's right on the cutoff line though, because I believe it's around 1965 when Gibson stops using it. Other manufacturers went until 69. But I like the wood grain that it has down in this area. It's looking pretty nice. It has a 24 3/4 inch scale length and 12 inch fretboard radius. I measure a 1.68 inch nut width. That increases to 2.09 by the 12th. First fret neck depth 0.86. I told you, 1.04 by the 12th. You see how much wider it gets? Some of them are a little bit more extreme than this. It's a unique profile, you should definitely try it. Another thing I usually associate with the neck profile on these is they tend to have skinnier nut widths. However, this one doesn't have that. I wonder if that was part of the custom ordered spec of this one with your custom finish. Or perhaps it just varies. But there you can see our color along the edge of the fretboard. You only get that on this color example. You can also see it on the edge of the nut there. Moving on to the headstock, somebody has replaced the tuners on this example with something that looks fairly similar, but you'll see two of the ferrules are missing over here. Still seems to work okay, just letting you know. And our truss rod is looking pretty good. And our truss rod cover is just a single ply material. It's bending from age. Moving on to the back, not too much to talk about here. You just get to see our finish. And then this looks like buckle worming that caused the clear coat to lift or something. And then that's why you're seeing it as kind of a goldish yellow color, is because that's the clear coat. It's like present on all the nicks and dings, so it seems consistent. But it's got wear on all the edges. It's well played. Thankfully, the neck is pretty clean. It's got a little bit of that phenomenon going on over here, but nothing too crazy. And now our replaced tuners. They might look the same style, but trust me, they're not. These aren't really even that good. The D string tuner is bent. I mean, it's functioning, but not the best. Probably want to replace these again, but they do function as is. And then we do have a serial number on here. It's just kind of hard to read due to this finish style. But it appears to be 74772. But it's a vintage guitar, so we should probably do the black light test just to make sure that the finish is even everywhere. It's all looking good on the top. Our knobs are glowing the way I would expect. Headstock's also looking good, minus our shadows. Those are just shadows from the tuners. And okay, doesn't look like we broke the finish back here, so likely what I was talking about, just a buckle impression that made the clear coat color stand out. You do got some finish wear through there, and I forgot to mention these strap buttons were replaced on this example. Our neck is looking fantastic here. There's a smudge on the headstock, that's why I wanted to blacklight it, but apparently it's just a smudge. Here's another reason why you get one of these. Only 5 pounds. Solid body. All the vintage goodness, and it doesn't break your back. But let's go ahead and hear how it sounds plugged in. First, let's start with an acoustic test. It's not necessarily loud, but it's so resonant. You feel the entire body and neck vibrating. Like my hand is slightly numb. That's just what I like about these things. And that's why I say they're great bedroom guitars. I'm getting some telly-like vibes out of this thing. Alright, so how did it sound? Honestly, not as bad as I remember. If you go into it with managed expectations, yeah, it's kind of like a cheap Telecaster. Sometimes cheap single coils sound good. Maybe it just varies example to example. I'm pretty happy with that one, though. I can see why nobody's ever bothered to replace it. Now, if you're looking for a high-end sound that you gig to thousands of people with, yeah, maybe not exactly that, but it's alright. So just remember, manage your expectations. I've always found these are just great to sit and play with. Practice your scales and any other techniques that you're working on. If you have to have something vintage, you just like the fact that the guitar has a little bit of a history. Unfortunately, these tuners are not that good. You feel them slipping while you're playing, and yeah, they definitely need changed. But I hope you guys enjoyed taking a look at this rare Ember Red version. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.